On today's episode, I'm going to talk about podcasts. So, this is actually a YouTube channel, but it's also a podcast. And initially, this was what I wanted to do. I wanted to start a podcast. YouTube actually came after, and it's kind of a pleasant surprise that people actually enjoyed it. So, I'm going to try and answer for you guys that may be considering podcasts some general stuff like why I started a writing podcast, what I've learned with this writing podcast, what gear I use, and the experience I've gathered. So stick with it. This could be a good one. All right, let's talk about why I started a podcast. I started this Writing Escapades podcast because, it's great marketing. It's very cheap. It's not free, but it's very cheap in retrospect. Um, and it gets my words out there. It gets my books out there. I get to talk to other authors. I get to make connections, and connections are worth a lot of money, really. They're priceless. You never know where a connection will lead. So these are all the kind of things I started to think about as I was kind of forming this podcast in my mind. I did some research. I saw what other podcasts were out there, what other writing podcasts were out there. And I saw a little spot for me to kind of wedge myself into. Writing podcasts are kind of a niche. Some people decide to do them as interviews. Some people decide to do them as writing advice. Some people decide to do them as narrated fiction. And I like all that stuff. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And initially, I didn't want to be kind of pigeonholed to just one type of podcast. So I decided it'd be a writing podcast. I'd give writing advice. I'd narrate some original fiction, and I would have interviews. And I kind of want to see, what people like the best. So it's one big experiment for me, and it's been fun, and I've learned a lot along the way. What have I learned since starting this podcast? I've learned that podcasts have a smaller audience than YouTube. I was surprised when I was getting more traction with YouTube than I was on the writing podcast. Once I started thinking about it, though, it makes sense. YouTube has been around a lot longer than podcasts have. I didn't really want to have just one avenue. I wanted the more the better, and YouTube is free, so it's been great, and I've enjoyed the experience. So I've actually, yeah, I've talked to a lot of other authors. People have messaged me. People message me all the time trying to be a guest on this podcast. And I'm keeping a list, but for the most part, I really do kind of seek out the authors that I want to have on this. And they're indie authors, and they're also traditional authors. But I am actively looking for other authors and agents and editors and these types of literary folks. So I'm looking at indie authors, I'm looking at traditional authors, but I want them to be guests that I choose. I think that part of having this podcast is that I get to pick who I want to talk to. And that for me is fun. And that's kind of the point of this. Like, if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't be doing it. That's just how I am. How did I start this podcast? I started this podcast by doing research. I tried to figure out what other authors were doing, what other podcasters were doing, and I tried to see where I could fit into this podcasting world. So this is still a relatively new podcast. I'm under 20 episodes, but I've got more to come, and I'm going to keep going with it because I like it. And when I like something, I just keep doing it. It's just how I am. After doing research on what kind of podcast I wanted to do, I then started doing research on which were the best platforms to use that could distribute the podcast. So there actually are a lot out there, and a lot of them offer like a free version, but the free version really doesn't give you much. And sometimes it won't store your podcast longer than a short period. So I couldn't do that. I need to have something that will be out there much longer. And I wanted to be able to upload several hours of audio. So what I ended up doing was going through each one, trying to figure out which one had the best reviews. And the platform that I chose was Buzzsprout. Now, they're not a sponsor, guys. I'm not sponsoring them in any way, but so far I've been relatively happy. It's, I think, $12 a month for me, and I can upload and they'll basically give me some sort of data, which gives me more information about where the reach is for the podcast, which I think is cool. There may be some better ones out there. So far I've been happy. Again, it's like $12 a month. I can upload for like 2, maybe 3 hours, and I never really hit that. So yeah. And after that, I started using that software. It's relatively easy. Again, there might be better ones out there. I'm not sure. But so far it suits my needs. What I like about Buzzsprout is that they have a pretty good reach. So by using them as a service, they also distribute it through iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and pretty much every other little one out there. So whichever avenue you listen to, there's a good chance you can listen to Writing Escapades with David Rawding on that platform. So I like that. That's pretty good. That's helpful. And then I kind of had to start coming up with some gear. So what gear do I use? Well, I use a Blue Yeti microphone. This is a condenser microphone. So there's basically like two types. There's stereo microphones, and then there's condenser microphones. And condenser microphones are a little more sensitive. So if there's like a dog barking just outside, the condenser microphone might pick it up. So you kind of have to have a little bit better soundproofing to use them, or just really have your space and your gear tuned pretty well, because sometimes it can actually give you more trouble on the back end trying to edit out those, clicks and sounds that I'm probably making right now. And then there's stereo microphones, which are actually a little cheaper. And I think they could work just as well. But I kind of wanted to have a pretty good microphone because I use this for other things. I use a microphone for Zoom meetings and stuff like that. So I'm happy with it. Blue Yeti, again, not a sponsor, but I've been happy so far. Again, these are things I may change, but as of now, they work and they're getting the podcast out there. And then in regards to software, I use Audacity. Audacity is a free software, and I think it works just fine. I have no problems with it. I mean, for me, this is a podcast. I'm not doing, vocals on a audio recording for like music or anything like that. If that were the case, yes, I would have really good equipment. If you're using YouTube, you can see the background of my my YouTube video is actually like a little studio, but that's not where I do this in my room. So it's pretty basic. It's just on a desk, and that's how I do it. I record into the microphone and I get it going, and then I put that audio and I put that into Audacity. And in Audacity, I can go through and I can edit and fix. And again, it's a free software. Not a sponsor, but it's been helpful. I like it so far. So I've talked to you a little bit about the hardware I'm using. I've talked to you about the software I'm using. And I've talked to you about why I started this podcast. It's great for marketing. It's great for collaboration. And it's great for meeting people and making connections. And basically, I'll tell you a little bit about what I've learned. I've, again, learned that people are very interested in being guests on podcasts. That's very apparent. I have learned that it's actually kind of easier than I thought. I thought it would be harder to get it going, but for the most part, it's all pretty, plug and play. It's very easy, actually. I think the next thing you need is to have content. And for me, I could talk about writing all day. I really could. I love writing, and it's really special in my heart. And if this podcast never goes anywhere, I'll still be happy because there's a few people out there listening that like to hear about writing, and maybe I'll help them along the way. I mean, if my advice or my tips can help you in your writing journey, that's pretty much all I want. Yes, I'll plug my books. Yes, I'll talk about projects I'm working on, but that excites me as well. So if I'm talking about something, it's usually something I'm excited about. I'm happy to share it with you guys. And if you can harvest some information out of what I'm saying, that's all the better. That's what I want. I was a professor, so I like to teach, and I like to talk about the things that I'm interested in. It's been fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I think you should try it. If you're on the fence, give it a whirl. And one thing that they recommend is doing at least 3 episodes, maybe even 4. Do them before you start the podcasting journey, because if you can get 3 or 4 done most podcasts seem like they fail after like 3 or 4. So if you can get those done and out of the way and start rolling, then you've already kind of made it over a little mini hump. So I don't know. I think you should give it a whirl if you're interested. And if you don't want to actually do the whole like setting up the podcast and paying the monthly fees for the distribution and that kind of stuff, then reach out to fellow podcasters and ask to be a guest. The worst thing that they can say is no. I keep a list of people that have reached out to me, and at some point, there's a good chance maybe I will dip into that list and ask them to come on. But yeah, I think it's good, and it's good community, and I think it's fun. And as long as you're having fun, go for it. And as I said, this is a marketing tool, so here comes some marketing right your way. Taking on Water and Redemption Grove. Those are my 2 books. They're novels, they're suspense. One's set in Alaska, the other one's set in New Hampshire. I think you might like them. Give it a look. Check them out on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. The link's in the description. And if you want, you can also subscribe to this channel or drop that like. It helps me out, and I appreciate every single one. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say about podcasts, and yeah, start one if you want, guys. Go for it. Just make the leap. But maybe try to record 3 or 4 episodes before you actually publish them. That way you've already got something to get you going. You got a momentum. All right, that's it. I'll catch you later, guys.